Only a matter of time for a major crash, were the words of George Russell after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, after drivers up and down the grid were subjected to extreme porpoising. So let's answer the key questions as the FIA finally intervenes in the porpoising crisis that has littered the 2022 season. There may be dramatic effects on the competitive order and the title race as a result, so I need you to stick around to the end to find out what those are. It's going to be a value-packed video. I can't wait to get into it and explain. I'm Ollie Patas, and boom, let's talk F1. Right, let's briefly go over the issue at hand. So 2022 cars are brand new Formula 1 cars, a new era, which are now ground effect cars. We had ground effect cars back in the 1970s and the early 1980s. And the phenomenon coming from ground effect cars is the issue of porpoising. Ground effect is basically how the car generates downforce. It generates downforce from the floor as opposed to the wings on top, like it was previously in 2018, 2019, and 2020, etc. The problem, however, comes at high speed, with airflow going out underneath the car to generate downforce. The car's getting closer and closer to the ground until the car bottoms out. The airflow then stalls, causing the car to rise, which generates bouncing. It generates bouncing because that process that I just said repeats at a very high frequency, as you can see in the video. So why are the FIA now intervening? Well, it's on health and safety grounds after a number of drivers complained heavily after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix after they were subjected to some extreme porpoising, especially in the Mercedes and Ferrari, the two teams that hit worst with this issue. George Russell and Carlos Sainz have been especially vocal of the issues throughout the season, and George Russell's words hold weight because he's a member of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, so his words hold weight. He says only a matter of time before there is a major crash as a result of this issue, labelling the 2022 cars as a recipe for disaster. Lewis Hamilton also described Baku as his most painful Formula 1 race ever. As we can see, he struggled to get out of the car after the race, and Fernando Alonso has said also that the ride in the 2022 cars is the worst it's been for decades. Porpoising to the extent we saw in Baku is not sustainable for drivers, and long-term health effects on things like spine, brain, etc. are not known. The FIA have come up with a strategy and a method which I'm going to reveal now, with Baku being the catalyst for this intervention. But before we go any further with this video, I need you to do something for me. I need you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, because it helps me out a lot. I don't like asking, it's very easy for you to do, but it helps me out a lot if you want to see more videos like this. What will the FIA do exactly? Well, they're not going to change the rules per se. They're not going to change the technical regulations. What they are going to do is issue a technical directive, which are there to assert rules already in place. They're planning on introducing a limit of vertical oscillations a driver can be exposed to within the car. This will be a new test for teams to pass throughout the race weekend. If they don't pass it, there is penalties and punishment. As a result, the FIA will do the following two things. They will scrutinise the design and wear of the planks and skids beneath the car. They will also establish a metric for what's considered acceptable levels of bouncing within the car. The method and formula for working this out is still being worked out with help from the teams. This was effective from the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, but because porpoising wasn't that much of a big deal there in the end, they didn't have to apply any of these new technical directives. So what are the effects of these changes and interventions from the FIA? Well, if there's evidence to suggest that the underside of the car is hitting the ground too aggressively, then changes to setups and ride heights may have to be made. Increasing the ride height will soften the porpoising, but it will sacrifice lap time, with Ferrari in a title fight against Red Bull and try and make up ground already. If they've got to combat these new technical directives and sacrifice lap time, it's not going to help them in their title chance and could have a major impact on whether they can challenge for the 2022 title. So at tracks when porpoising is particularly bad, if it gets particularly bad, the Ferrari could fall behind and the Red Bull advantage could grow even further. Mercedes is probably the worst team affected by porpoising on the grid, so if they've got to combat these new technical directives as well and sacrifice even more lap time, any challenge in the second half of the season could be completely hampered. But they did manage to eradicate a lot of their porpoising with their upgrades at the Spanish Grand Prix, which is a positive sign heading for the rest of the season. FIA going forward will now have something to police over the course of a Grand Prix weekend. My opinion on the following on this is, well, I don't think they need to get involved in the first place, to be honest, because the teams need to dance to the teams to solve the issues. But if they are going to intervene, this is probably the best solution, because the alternative is to issue a new set of technical regulations, a change set of technical regulations that applies to all the teams and will hamper and damage and punish those who actually got the porpoising issues right and solved it at the start of the season. Forces those teams affected worse by porpoising to not only protect their drivers, but puts pressure on them to solve the issues, given that they'll be sacrificing lap time. Universal change to the regulations will not be found in teams like Williams and Red Bull, who don't really suffer from porpoising. Mercedes, Ferrari, Alpine, McLaren, whoever's struggling with porpoising, better get your heads down, better solve it. There we go, that pretty much sums up the current situation with that. Time will tell whether it's going to become a regular storyline heading into weekends or certain weekends, or whether teams can fix it as a result of this. Maybe it's a bit of a kick up the backside to solve it. But if the FIA are going to intervene, this is probably the fairest and best way to do it. That pretty much summarises the whole video. I'm Ollie Patas, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and boom, let's talk F1.